The transport bus hissed to a stop outside Paris Island Marine Corps Recruit Depot, its brakes screaming like a warning shot across the humid South Carolina morning. June heat already shimmered off the asphalt in waves that distorted the imposing brick buildings beyond, making them waver like a mirage. Or maybe a memory. Kira Donovan lifted her head from the window where she'd spent the last 3 hours watching the coastal marshlands slide past in silence. While the other recruits had fidgeted, dozed, or whispered nervous predictions about the hell that awaited them, Kira had remained perfectly still. Her posture was military straight despite never having served a day. Her gray eyes, winter steel someone once called them, constantly observing, constantly calculating. She was 24 years old, 5'4", with an athletic build that suggested capability without drawing attention. Dark hair pulled back in the regulation style. Nothing about her screamed special or dangerous or prepared. Nothing except those eyes if you knew how to read them. Eyes that had seen things no civilian should see. Eyes that belonged to a ghost's daughter. "Welcome to hell," muttered the lanky farm boy beside her, his Adam's apple bobbing like a fishing lure as he swallowed hard. His name tag read Morrison, and sweat already darkened his collar despite the bus's struggling air conditioning. Kira didn't respond. She simply gathered her small duffel bag from beneath the seat with movements that were economical, precise, practiced. Everything she owned in the world fit in that bag, and most of it was regulation issue. There was only one personal item hidden at the bottom, wrapped in a t-shirt, a set of dog tags that didn't belong to her. Tags that had belonged to Colonel Dalton Reaper Donovan Delta Force, who had died or been murdered depending on who was telling the story 13 years ago in the Iraqi desert. "Off the bus. Move it. Move it. Move it." The voice cracked through the humid air like artillery fire. Sergeant Mara Carver stood at the bus door, a brick wall in uniform, her face carved from stone in old anger. She was 38, career Marine, and her eyes held the special contempt reserved for the 5 female recruits scattered among the 40 men on this bus. Recruits stumbled over each other in their haste to comply, faces already slick with sweat. And something deeper, the first taste of fear that would season every moment of the next 12 weeks. Kira waited until the initial crush subsided, counting heartbeats the way her father had taught her. Never rush. Haste creates mistakes. Mistakes create casualties. She rose smoothly and stepped toward the door. The humidity hit her like a physical force thick enough to chew. She descended the bus steps with deliberate care, her boot touching each riser with measured precision. Then 3 steps from the bottom she stumbled. Her right foot caught the edge of the step, her body tilted forward with apparent clumsiness, arms windmilling for balance. Several male recruits glanced over with barely concealed smirks. Even Sergeant Carver's lip curled, slightly, confirmation of what she already believed about women in combat boots. But Kira's recovery was instantaneous. She caught herself with perfect weight distribution, her center of gravity never truly compromised, muscles engaging with fluid control that spoke of thousands of hours of training. It happened so fast that only someone looking for it would notice. Only someone who understood that the stumble itself was performance art. 17 years of preparation, and it all came down to this, making them believe she was ordinary. "Female recruits fall in separately," Carver's voice carried across the parade ground like a slap. "Let's see if you can at least manage to stand in a straight line." As Kira moved to join the other women, she caught the sneer on a nearby male recruit's face. Big kid, probably played football in high school, shoulders like a linebacker, and the confidence of someone who'd never been truly challenged. "This should be fun to watch," he said to his buddy, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Wonder how long before they start crying. I give it 2 days." Kira kept her face expressionless as she fell into line. The other 4 women stood rigid, isolated in their own private crucibles. To her left was Corporal Bryn Sullivan, blonde and nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to maintain proper stance. Sullivan had introduced herself on the bus with a shaky smile and a confession. "First time away from home. I don't know if I can do this." Kira had offered platitudes then, now standing under the merciless sun with Carver's contempt washing over them like napalm. Those platitudes felt hollow. What none of them knew, what no one at Paris Island knew, was that Kira Donovan hadn't come here to prove herself. She hadn't come to shatter glass ceilings or make history. She'd come for something far simpler and infinitely more dangerous. She'd come for the truth about Operation Desert Veil. She'd come for the men who'd murdered her father. Montana winter 1987. The converted barn behind the Donovan ranch house sat like a gray monument against the endless white of Montana winter. Snow piled 3 feet deep against its weathered walls, and the wind howled through gaps in the timber with a sound like distant screaming. Inside, a wood stove burned in the corner, barely making a dent in the cold. 10-year-old Kira circled her father slowly, her small feet leaving precise prints in the sawdust that covered the floor. Her breath came in controlled puffs visible in the frigid air. She'd been at this for an hour and her muscles trembled with fatigue, but she kept her guard up the way he'd taught her. Colonel Dalton Donovan watched his daughter with eyes that missed nothing. At 42, he was compact and wiry rather than imposing, with gray hair already threading through the dark at his temples. 20 years in Delta Force had turned his body into a precision instrument, every movement economical, every gesture calculated. The scars on his hands told stories he'd never share with his wife. But he was sharing something else with his daughter, something more important than stories. He was sharing survival. "You're telegraphing," he said, his voice matter-of-fact rather than critical. "Your right shoulder drops before you move. In a real fight, that's all the warning your opponent needs." Kira nodded, sweat plastering her dark hair to her forehead despite the cold. She adjusted her stance, trying to keep her shoulders level. "Again," her father instructed, raising his hands into a defensive position. She attacked a flurry of strikes and feints that would have overwhelmed most grown men. Her father deflected each one with minimal movement, his expression unchanging. Then, in a move too fast for her to track, he swept her feet from under her. Kira hit the sawdust with a thud that drove the air from her lungs. "Better," he said, extending a hand to help her up. "But you're still thinking linearly. Combat isn't chess, Kira. It's jazz. You have to improvise." As she regained her feet, Kira caught sight of her mother watching from the barn doorway. Eleanor Donovan's face was a study in conflicted emotions, pride and worry battling for dominance. She never objected to these training sessions, but she never fully approved either. There was something in her eyes that said she understood what her husband was preparing their daughter for, even if she couldn't bear to name it out loud. "That's enough for today," Dalton said, noticing his wife's presence. "Go help your mother with dinner." Kira gathered her gear with the same precision she'd been taught to apply to all tasks. As she passed her mother in the doorway, Eleanor brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead with gentle fingers. "He pushes you so hard," she murmured. "I want him to," Kira replied with the absolute certainty of youth. "I'm going to be just like him someday." Later that evening, after Eleanor had gone to bed, Kira found her father in his study. He sat cleaning his service pistol with methodical precision, while a glass of bourbon sat untouched on the desk beside him. The walls were lined with bookshelves, military history, tactical manuals, philosophy texts arranged with military precision. The only decoration was a shadow box containing his numerous commendations, including the silver star he'd earned during a classified operation no one could talk about. "Dad," Kira lingered in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up, his hands never pausing in their practiced movements. "Of course. Why are you training me like this? None of my friends' dads teach them how to fight, or how to survive in the wilderness, or how to read people." Dalton Donovan was silent for a long moment, his fingers reassembling the pistol with unconscious skill. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. "Come here, Kira." She crossed the room and sat in the leather chair across from his desk. Her father finished with the pistol, set it aside, and gave her his full attention. "The world is not kind to those who are unprepared. he said. I've seen what happens to people who can't defend themselves, who don't understand the threats around them. His eyes took on the distant look they sometimes got when he was remembering things he never spoke about. I won't always be here to protect you, so I'm teaching you to protect yourself. But why all of it? Kira pressed. The languages, the survival skills, the fighting. Because knowledge is armor, Kira. Every skill you master is a weapon in your arsenal, a tool that can't be taken from you. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. The world will underestimate you because you're female, because you're small. Let them. That's your advantage, but never ever underestimate yourself. Kira nodded solemnly, trying to understand the weight behind his words. Is that why you make the training so hard? A rare smile crossed her father's face. Exactly, because the real world is harder. He picked up the bourbon and took a small sip. There's something else you should understand. The strongest people aren't the ones who never feel fear or doubt. They're the ones who feel it and act anyway. Like you. The smile faded. I've made mistakes, Kira. Choices I regret. That's part of life too. Learning to live with the consequences of your actions. What kind of mistakes? Her father was silent for so long that Kira thought he wouldn't answer. Then setting down his glass, he said, I've followed orders I shouldn't have, and I've refused orders I should have followed. The trick is knowing the difference. His eyes refocused on her. That's why we read philosophy as well as tactics, because sometimes the hardest battles are fought in here. He tapped his temple. Knowing what's right when everyone around you is saying it's wrong. Kira absorbed this, turning it over in her mind with the seriousness of a child who understood she was being told something important even if she couldn't fully grasp it yet. Is that why some of the other officers don't like you? Because you don't always follow orders? A sharp laugh escaped him. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. Let's just say I've made my share of enemies by speaking uncomfortable truths. He studied her for a moment. That's another lesson, Kira. Standing up for what's right doesn't make you popular. Sometimes it makes you very, very alone. What Kira couldn't know was that her father was already planning for a mission that would prove those words prophetic. A mission in the Iraqi desert where orders and conscience would collide with fatal consequences. A mission where he would have to choose between following commands and doing what was right, knowing the choice might cost him everything. He reached into his desk drawer and removed a small wooden box. Inside were 2 sets of dog tags on chains. He lifted one set out and Kira noticed unusual markings etched into the metal alongside the standard identification information. This is a special tag, he explained, handing it to her. The markings are a code one used by certain Delta operators for emergency extraction. If you're ever in a situation where all other options have failed, where you need immediate help and conventional channels are compromised, this will identify you to the right people. Kira turned the tag over in her small hands, studying the seemingly random pattern of notches and symbols. Why are you giving me this? Her father's expression grew grave. Because the world is unpredictable and I won't always be there to protect you. This is insurance. Against what? Against the day when you might have to make the kind of choice I mentioned. He placed his hand over hers, closing her fingers around the dog tags. Keep it hidden but accessible, and Kira only use it if absolutely necessary. The kind of help it summons comes with its own complications. She slipped the chain around her neck, tucking the tags beneath her shirt where they rested cold against her skin. I'll be careful, she promised. I know you will. He smiled again, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Now let's get back to work. Show me that moment of Mushin again, the mind without mind. They resumed training, moving through forms and counters with a grace that came from countless repetitions. But Kira couldn't shake the feeling that her father was preparing her for something specific. Something he feared but couldn't or wouldn't name. It was only years later, after his disappearance, after the funeral with the empty casket, after the carefully worded lies from men in dress uniforms, that she began to understand the true purpose of that winter's lessons. He had been preparing her for a war he knew was coming, A war that had finally arrived at Paris Island, present day. The first week at Paris Island was designed to break civilians down to nothing before rebuilding them as Marines. For the women of Echo Company, the process came with an extra layer of scrutiny and skepticism. The Marine Corps had been the last holdout against gender integration. And even now, with official barriers falling, the culture remained deeply resistant. Kira moved through the prescribed hell with mechanical precision. She ran when ordered to run, did push-ups until her arms trembled, and endured the constant barrage of insults without visible reaction. She kept herself firmly in the middle of the pack, never the fastest, never the slowest, never drawing attention. It required extraordinary control to appear ordinary. On the obstacle course, she deliberately added seconds to her time. When scaling walls, she made her movements look effortful rather than fluid. During hand-to-hand combat instruction, she held back every instinct her father had drilled into her, limiting herself to the basic techniques being demonstrated. But someone was watching. Staff Sergeant Wade Blackwood stood apart from the other drill instructors, his broad shoulders rigid beneath his uniform, his cold blue eyes tracking Kira specifically. He was 38, with the build of someone who'd spent 20 years maintaining peak physical condition. But there was something else about him, a tension in his jaw, a slight tremor in his hands when he thought no one was looking. PTSD. Kira recognized. She'd seen it in enough veterans who frequented her mother's diner back in Montana. The war had marked him, left scars that didn't show on the surface but ran deep nonetheless. On the 7th day, during morning formation, Kira noticed Blackwood in intense conversation with another drill instructor near the admin building. Their voices didn't carry, but their body language did. The other man, Sergeant Miller, was shaking his head, looking uncertain. Blackwood's posture remained rigid, insistent. That afternoon, during rifle qualifications, Blackwood appeared beside Kira's firing position on the range. She was demonstrating competent but unremarkable marksmanship with the M16A4, grouping her shots within acceptable parameters for a recruit at this stage of training, but nothing that would raise eyebrows. Mitchell, Blackwood said, using the wrong name deliberately. Then he corrected himself. Donovan. Kira Donovan. She maintained her firing stance, eyes downrange. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Your father was military. It wasn't a question, but Kira responded as if it were. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Army Delta Force. KIA, Iraq, 1991, Staff Sergeant. Blackwood was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed, dropped lower, become more personal. Colonel Dalton Donovan. Reaper, they called him. Kira's hands remained steady on the rifle, but her heart rate spiked. She forced herself to breathe normally, to not react, to keep playing the role. I wouldn't know about that, Staff Sergeant. I was 7 when he died. 7. Blackwood's voice held something she couldn't quite identify. Not sympathy, not quite guilt, something in between. Old enough to remember him then, old enough to wonder what really happened. The statement hung in the humid air like smoke. Kira didn't respond, didn't move. Every instinct screamed at her to turn, to look Blackwood in the eye, to demand answers. But 17 years of training held her in place. Your grouping is improving, Blackwood said, finally, his voice returning to the standard instructor tone. But you're still anticipating the recoil. Squeeze, don't pull, again. He walked away, leaving Kira with her racing pulse and 1,000 questions. But one thing was now certain: Blackwood knew who she was, which meant the timeline had just accelerated. That evening, as the recruits cleaned their weapons in the barracks, Corporal Bryn Sullivan approached Kira's bunk. The blonde woman had been increasingly withdrawn over the past few days, her earlier nervous energy replaced by something more watchful. That was intense today, Sullivan said, sitting on the edge of Kira's bunk without invitation. Blackwood talking to you. What did he want? Kira continued her methodical cleaning of the M16, her hands moving through the practiced motions while her mind worked on the larger puzzle. Just standard instruction, correcting my technique. He never corrects technique personally. That's what the regular DIs are for. Sullivan's eyes were too sharp, too interested. You were out there a while. He usually just barks corrections and moves on. Seemed different with you. The question confirmed what Kira had begun to suspect. Sullivan wasn't just nervous and lonely. She was fishing for information. But for whom he mentioned my father served, Kira said carefully. That's all. And your father was Delta Force. That's pretty serious. Was, Kira emphasized. Past tense. He's been dead 13 years. Sullivan nodded, but something in her expression suggested the conversation wasn't over. She opened her mouth to ask another question when Sergeant Carver's voice cracked through the barracks. Lights out in 5 minutes. I want every weapon spotless and every boot shined. Tomorrow we start live fire exercises, and if any of you embarrass me, you'll be running until your feet bleed. Is that clear? Yes, Sergeant. The barracks exploded into final preparations. Sullivan retreated to her own bunk, but Kira caught her pulling out a cell phone strictly against regulations and typing something quickly before hiding it away. Reporting back, Kira thought, but to whom? As the lights went out and the barracks settled into the sounds of exhausted sleep, Kira lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her hand moved unconsciously to the dog tags hidden beneath her regulation t-shirt. Not the special ones her father had given her, but his original tags. She'd found them in his personal effects, the ones the army had returned after his death. They were the only thing she had left of him besides memories and questions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight in the darkness Kira allowed herself to remember. The funeral had been 6 years after his death, after they'd finally given up searching for his body in the Iraqi desert. The casket had been empty, a ceremonial gesture to give the family closure. But there was no closure in an empty box, no peace in unanswered questions. Major Vincent Aldridge had presented her mother with the folded flag. He'd been 45 then, with silver already threading through his hair. His uniform immaculate, his words carefully rehearsed. Colonel Donovan died heroically saving his men from an enemy ambush. Aldridge had said, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a career officer. His sacrifice exemplifies the finest traditions of the United States Army and Delta Force. The nation is grateful for his service. But even at 13, Kira had known he was lying. She'd seen it in the way his eyes slid away from hers, the slight hesitation before each statement, the too firm grip on her mother's hand. She'd catalogued every tell, every micro-expression, storing them away with the cold precision her father had taught her. Someone else had been at the funeral, too. A weathered man in his 50s with a gray beard and haunted eyes standing at the back of the crowd. He'd watched the ceremony with barely contained anger, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. When the final prayers were said and people began to disperse, he'd approached Kira and her mother. Mrs. Donovan, he'd said, his voice rough from disuse or emotion. My name is Thomas Grayson. I served with your husband. I'm sorry for your loss. Eleanor Donovan had thanked him with hollow courtesy, too numb with grief to ask questions. But Kira had looked into Grayson's eyes and seen something that made her pulse quicken. He knew. He knew what had really happened. Mr. Grayson, she'd said, ignoring her mother's gentle tug to leave. Did you serve with my father in Iraq? Grayson's jaw had tightened. Yes. Were you there when he died? A long pause, then, yes. What really happened? Grayson had looked at her, then really looked at her, and she'd seen the war being fought behind his eyes. The desire to tell the truth versus the fear of consequences. Finally, he'd leaned down so only she could hear. Your father was murdered for doing the right thing. When you're old enough, when you're ready, find Jackson Brennan. He owns a bar near Paris Island. He'll tell you everything. Then he'd walked away, disappearing into the crowd, before Eleanor could register what had been said. 11 years later, Kira had stepped off a bus at Paris Island carrying a duffel bag and a mission. Tomorrow she would find Jackson Smoke Brennan. Tomorrow the real work would begin. The Saturday morning air hung thick with moisture as Kira slipped away from the barracks during the brief liberty period granted to recruits who'd survived their first 2 weeks. Most of Echo Company had scattered to the base exchange or the phone banks to call home. Corporal Sullivan had watched Kira leave with eyes too sharp, too interested, but said nothing. The note had arrived in Kira's care package the night before, hidden inside a rolled pair of socks. Simple handwritten in block letters, the Foxhole, Saturday, 1400. A friend who served with Reaper. She'd memorized the address and burned the note in the latrine, watching the paper curl and blacken before flushing the ashes. Her father had taught her that lesson: early evidence is a weapon that cuts both ways. The Foxhole Tavern sat 2 miles off base, a weathered wooden structure that looked like it had been standing since the Korean War. Paint peeled from the siding in long gray strips. The windows were dark-tinted by decades of cigarette smoke and the kind of stories that needed shadows to be told properly. A faded sign above the door showed a cartoon Marine diving into a foxhole while artillery shells exploded overhead. Beneath it, smaller letters read EST, 1952. Kira pushed through the door into cool darkness. Her eyes adjusted slowly, revealing a handful of old men scattered at the bar and in corner booths. All of them had the same weathered look, the same careful posture of men who'd seen combat and survived it. Gulf War, the kind of place where young Marines didn't come to drink, where the alcohol was just an excuse to remember in peace. "Kira Donovan." The voice came from the back corner, rough as gravel and just as hard. She turned to see a man in his late 60s rising from a booth. Jackson Brennan was built like a fire hydrant, compact, solid, immovable. His gray hair was military short, his face mapped with wrinkles that spoke of too much sun and not enough sleep. But his eyes were sharp, pale blue and penetrating, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Brennan," Kira said, moving toward him with measured steps. She'd spent 2 weeks being cautious, being controlled. The habit was hard to break even now. "Smoke," he corrected, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Nobody's called me Jackson since 1953. His eyes tracked her movement as she sat, cataloging every detail. "You got Dalton's eyes, gray like winter steel, and his way of moving like you're always expecting contact. You knew my father well." Smoke signaled to the bartender, 2 fingers, a subtle gesture, and moments later 2 glasses of bourbon appeared on scarred wood. "Dalton Donovan saved my life in Korea, Pusan Perimeter, September 1950. I was 19, green as grass, pinned down by Chinese machine gun fire. Your daddy, he wasn't your daddy then, just another corporal with more balls than sense. He crawled through 50 yards of hell to drag me back to our lines." He took a drink, the liquid amber catching what little light filtered through the grimy windows. "Took a bullet in the leg doing it. Still has..." He stopped, corrected himself. "Still had the scar when I saw him last, March 1991. Kira's hands remained steady on the table, but her pulse hammered in her ears. "Iraq. Iraq," Smoke confirmed. "Gulf War, the part they don't put in history books." He studied her face with those penetrating eyes. "Thomas Grayson talked to you. At the funeral. I was there too, back row, couldn't bring myself to get closer. Saw him pull you aside. He told me to find you, said you'd tell me the truth." "Truth?" Smoke's laugh was bitter. "Truth's a funny thing in war, slippery, changes depending on who's doing the telling." He drank again, longer this time. "But I'll tell you what I saw. What your daddy told me before it all went to hell. Then you can decide what truth means to you." The bar around them seemed to recede, the other patrons fading into background noise. Kira leaned forward slightly, every sense focused on the old Marine across from her. "February 1991. Smoke began, his voice dropping to the tone of a man recounting sacred things. "Ground campaign ends. Coalition forces steamroll through Iraq in 100 hours. Saddam's army is routed, Kuwait is liberated, and President Bush decides not to push to Baghdad. Leaves Saddam in power. A lot of us thought that was a mistake, but orders are orders." He traced a pattern on the scarred table with one thick finger, as if drawing a map only he could see. "March comes. Most troops are pulling back, heading home to parades and yellow ribbons. But certain elements, special operations, intelligence assets, they stay behind. Securing sites, gathering intel, looking for the WMDs, everyone was sure Saddam had hidden somewhere. Your daddy's Delta team gets activated. Mission orders come down from Major Vincent Aldridge, ambitious bastard with his eye on a promotion and connections that ran all the way to the Pentagon. What was the mission? Officially secure a suspected chemical weapons depot near Al-Kafji up by the border. Intel said Saddam had hidden chemical artillery shells there during the retreat. Makes sense, right? Find the weapons, document them, hand the evidence over to UN inspectors. Standard post-war cleanup. But that's not what happened. Smoke's expression darkened. Your daddy's team deployed March 12th. Colonel Dalton Donovan commanding. Lieutenant Wade Blackwood as second. Major Aldridge as executive officer. Corporal Thomas Grayson as team medic. 6 others. They reach the depot coordinates and find exactly what Intel promised: a hidden facility, blast doors, the whole setup. But when they breach it, the place is already destroyed. Demolition charges, precision work. Iraqis had blown it themselves rather than let it fall into our hands. No weapons, no evidence. Mission failure. Kira's mind raced ahead, filling in gaps, seeing patterns. But Aldridge didn't want to report failure. Worse than that. Smoke's voice went flat, emotionless, the way soldiers speak when the memories are too heavy to carry feeling. Aldridge had other orders, private orders. Orders that didn't come through official channels. 3 clicks north of the depot there was a Kurdish village. Small place, maybe 200 people. After Saddam's army got pushed out, some Iraqi soldiers, deserters, boys, who didn't want to die for a dictator, they sought asylum there. Kurdish leaders were harboring them, trying to negotiate safe passage to Turkey. The pieces began to click together in Kira's mind, like a rifle being assembled. A peace negotiation. Exactly. And certain people in certain defense contractors didn't want peace. War's profitable. Prolonged conflict means more weapon sales, more contracts, more money flowing into the right pockets. Aldridge was on someone's payroll. Company called Greystone Solutions, one of those military contractor outfits that does the Pentagon's dirty work. They'd paid him $2 million to make sure the conflict didn't end too clean. Kira felt cold despite the stuffy warmth of the bar. The chemical strike. Smoke nodded slowly. Aldridge ordered your daddy to use recovered chemical munitions, old mustard gas shells they'd found at another site, to hit the village. Make it look like Saddam's weapons were still active, kill the peace negotiators, blame it on Iraqi chemical weapons. 2 birds, 1 stone. Reignite tensions, justify continued presence. Keep the money flowing. And my father refused. Dalton Donovan didn't just refuse. He threatened to bring Aldridge up on war crimes charges, said he'd go to JAG, to the International Criminal Court, if necessary. Your daddy had evidence, photos, soil samples, communications intercepts, proving Aldridge was on Greystone's payroll. He documented everything, Kira, everything. Smoke reached into his jacket and pulled out a small padded envelope, setting it on the table between them. The envelope was worn, handled countless times over 13 years. Kira stared at it but didn't reach for it yet. What's in there? Flash drive, encrypted. Your daddy got it to me 3 days before he died through a Kurdish translator we'd worked with. Told me if anything happened to him, I should hold on to it until his daughter was old enough to understand. Until she was ready to do something about it. Smoke's eyes bored into hers. Are you ready, Kira? She thought about the last 13 years. The thousands of hours in dojos and training rooms. The languages learned, the survival skills mastered, the combat techniques drilled until they became instinct. The careful planning that had brought her to Paris Island, into the heart of the machine that had killed her father. I've been ready since I was 7 years old. Smoke slid the envelope across the table. The encryption key is on a set of dog tags, special ones your daddy had made. Thomas Grayson has them up in the mountains of North Carolina. He's been hiding there since they medically discharged him for psychological trauma. Paranoia, they called it. But Grayson's not paranoid. He just knows what happens to witnesses who talk. Kira's fingers closed around the envelope, feeling its weight. Tell me how my father died. The truth. The old Marine's face seemed to age a decade in the space of a breath. March 17th, 1991. Your daddy confronted Aldridge in front of the whole team, said he was refusing the order and reporting everything to command. Aldridge gave him one chance to reconsider. Dalton wouldn't budge, so Aldridge turned to Lieutenant Blackwood, young, ambitious, with PTSD from the ground campaign eating him alive, and gave him a choice. Follow orders and earn a promotion or face court-martial for insubordination. Blackwood chose ambition. Blackwood chose survival, in his mind anyway. They staged a firefight that evening, made it look like Iraqi forces had ambushed the team during a patrol. In the chaos, Blackwood shot your father. 3 rounds center mass. Grayson saw it happen from 50 meters away, was treating a wounded Kurdish civilian at the time. Your daddy's last words. Smoke's voice caught, recovered. He said, "Tell my daughter truth matters more than orders." The bar had gone completely silent. Kira realized the other patrons had been listening, these old warriors, hearing a story they recognized in their bones, the story of orders versus conscience, of systems that chewed up good men and spit out convenient lies. The official report, Smoke continued, said Colonel Donovan died heroically defending his team from an enemy ambush. Silver Star posthumous, full honors, and the truth got buried in the Iraqi desert along with his body. Kira's hands had clenched into fists without her realizing it. She forced them open, forced herself to breathe. Control, always control. That's what her father had taught her. You said you've been watching me since I was 10, that you funded my training. Smoke nodded. Martial arts scholarship that wasn't really a scholarship, equipment that showed up when your mama couldn't afford it. That barn behind your house that mysteriously got a complete renovation right around the time you turned 12, insulation, heating, proper matting. All of it. Why? Because Dalton asked me to. Before that last mission, he pulled me aside, said he had a bad feeling about this one, that if anything happened to him, I needed to look after you and your mama. But more than that, he said you were special. Said you had his instincts, his intensity. Said if the truth ever needed telling, you'd be the one to do it. He spent 7 years preparing you, Kira, teaching you everything he knew. Not because he wanted you to be a warrior, but because he knew someday you'd need those skills to finish what he started. The weight of 13 years settled onto Kira's shoulders. All those training sessions, all those lessons that had seemed excessive, obsessive. Her father hadn't been preparing her for some vague future threat. He'd been preparing her for this specific mission, for this war. Where's Grayson exactly? Smoke pulled out a worn topographical map, unfolding it on the table. Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina, about 3 hours north of here. He's got a cabin at this elevation. He pointed to a mark on the map. Fortified it over the years, paranoid as hell, but with good reason. Aldridge had the other team members tracked down. 2 died in accidents within a year of coming home. A Kurdish doctor who helped your daddy disappeared without a trace. Grayson survived because he's smart and he's careful. How do I reach him? You don't. He'll reach you if he decides to. I'll call ahead, tell him you're coming, but Kira... Smoke's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. Grayson's unstable. Guilt and PTSD have eaten him alive for 13 years. He's got the dog tags, he's got a journal with contemporaneous notes, but he's also got a shotgun and a hair trigger. You approach wrong, he'll shoot first and identify the body later. I can handle it. I know you can. Question is, should you... Smoke released her wrist but held her gaze. Once you open this door, Kira, it doesn't close. Aldridge is a full colonel now. Blackwood's a staff sergeant with a spotless record. They've got power, connections, resources. You're a 24-year-old recruit who just showed up at the base where they both happen to be stationed. You think that's coincidence? The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Kira had wondered about it herself late at night in the barracks. What were the odds that both men responsible for her father's death would end up at Paris Island at the exact moment she enlisted? You think they know I'm here? I think Blackwood recognized your name the moment he saw your file. I think he's been watching you since day one, waiting to see what you'd do. I think that corporal who's been asking you questions, Sullivan, she's reporting back to him. And I think Aldridge showing up for a routine inspection right after you arrive isn't routine at all. They're closing ranks. They're preparing. Question is, what are they preparing for? To silence you, to discredit you, or are they waiting for you to make your move so they can eliminate the threat permanently? Smoke leaned back, his weathered face grave. Your daddy was a great man, Kira. One of the best I ever served with, but being great didn't save him. Being right didn't save him. What makes you think you'll survive when he didn't? Kira thought about that for a long moment. In the dim light of the foxhole surrounded by ghosts and old warriors, she made her decision. Because my father fought alone. He tried to work within the system through proper channels, trusting that the truth would be enough. But he didn't account for how deep the rot went, how much power his enemies had. She met Smoke's eyes with steel in her own. I won't make that mistake. I'm going to Grayson. I'm getting those dog tags and that journal. And then I'm going to expose everything, not through military channels, but everywhere at once. Media, Congress, international courts, all of it. So even if they kill me, the truth survives. Something that might have been pride flickered across Smoke's weathered face. You really are Dalton's daughter. I'm also Eleanor's daughter, and she taught me something my father never could. What's that? Patience. My father was a warrior. He understood combat tactics, immediate threats. But my mother understood the long game. She waited 13 years for me to be ready before she told me where his old footlocker was, the one with his personal effects. She knew I'd find the hints he'd left, the encrypted drives, the coded messages. She knew I'd come here eventually. And she knew I'd do it right. Smoke studied her with new respect. So what's your play? I request weekend liberty. Say I want to visit family. You arrange coverage with someone in the guard rotation. You said you have friends there. I drive to Grayson's cabin, get the evidence, and drive back before anyone realizes I'm gone. Monday morning, I'm back in formation like nothing happened. And if Blackwood follows you, then I lead him to exactly where I want him. 3,000 feet up in the mountains where Grayson has home terrain advantage and I have training that nobody at Paris Island has seen yet. Kira's smile was cold. My father taught me that when you're outnumbered, you control the terrain. Make them fight on your ground. Smoke was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll make the calls. Weekend liberty approved through a cousin who works in admin. Guard rotation adjusted for a 4-hour window Saturday night. Vehicle. He pulled out a set of keys. 1998 Ford F-150 blue, parked 3 blocks from here. Registration's clean, nothing to trace back. In the glove box, you'll find a Beretta M9, 2 spare magazines, and a topographical map with the route marked. You've been planning this. Since the day I saw you get off that bus, I recognize a mission when I see one. And soldiers help soldiers. He slid the keys across the table. One more thing. In the truck's bed under a tarp, there's a go bag. Cash, fake ID, burner phones. If this goes sideways, if you need to disappear, everything you need is there. I'm not running. Your daddy said the same thing, right up until Blackwood shot him. Smoke's voice went hard. I'm not saying run from the fight, Kira. I'm saying live to fight it. There's no honor in dying when the mission isn't complete. They sat in silence for a moment, 2 warriors separated by decades but united by purpose. Finally, Smoke raised his glass. To Dalton Donovan, Reaper, the best goddamn soldier I ever knew. Kira raised her own glass, the bourbon burning her throat as she drank. To my father, and to finishing what he started. As she left the foxhole, stepping back into the humid Carolina afternoon, Kira felt the encrypted drive burning like a coal in her pocket. The first piece of the puzzle secured. 3 days until weekend liberty. 3 days to maintain her cover while Blackwood watched and Aldridge calculated. 3 days until she drove into the mountains to meet a ghost. She walked back toward base, passing strip malls and fast food restaurants and all the mundane trappings of civilian life. But her mind was already in the mountains, already playing out scenarios and contingencies. Grayson would be paranoid, armed, possibly unstable. She'd need to approach carefully, prove her identity without triggering a violent response. Her phone, the contraband burner Smoke had slipped her along with the keys, vibrated in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. "They know you went off base. Sullivan reported it. Expect fallout. S." Kira's jaw tightened. The timeline was compressing faster than anticipated. But she'd trained for this, prepared for this. Her entire life had been preparation for this. She entered the base through the main gate, showing her ID to the bored Marine on duty. As she walked back toward the barracks, she saw Staff Sergeant Blackwood standing near the parade ground watching her approach. Their eyes met across 50 yards of manicured grass and concrete. He knew. She knew he knew. And they both knew that the charade was almost over. The real war was about to begin. Inside the barracks, Corporal Sullivan sat on her bunk phone in hand, pretending to read messages. But Kira saw the tension in her shoulders, the too careful way she didn't look up as Kira entered. "Good afternoon, off base," Sullivan asked, her voice pitched just slightly too high. "Visited family," Kira lied smoothly. "My aunt lives near Charleston. Hadn't seen her since I enlisted." "That's nice. Family's important." Sullivan's fingers moved on her phone screen, typing something. Reporting. "Sergeant Carver was looking for you earlier. Nothing urgent, just wanted to remind everyone about Monday's qual course." "I'll check in with her. Thanks." Kira moved to her footlocker, opened it with deliberate casualness. Inside, hidden in the false bottom she'd constructed using techniques her father taught her, was everything that mattered. The encrypted drive now joined the other pieces she'd been collecting: photographs, notes, a growing map of connections between Aldridge, Blackwood, and Greystone Solutions. That night, as the barracks settled into sleep, Kira lay awake, staring at the ceiling. In her mind, she replayed every word Smoke had told her, every detail of her father's last mission. The pattern was clear now. Aldridge had been paid to sabotage peace. Blackwood had been the weapon, and her father had been the obstacle that needed removing. But there was something else, something nagging at the edges of her consciousness. Smoke had said 2 other team members died in accidents. A Kurdish doctor disappeared. That level of cleanup required resources, coordination, ongoing monitoring. Which meant Aldridge and Blackwood weren't working alone. They had help, support, maybe even official sanction from somewhere high up the chain. Her father's voice echoed from memory. "The most dangerous enemies aren't the ones you can see. They're the ones pulling strings from the shadows." Kira's hand moved to the dog tags beneath her shirt. Her father's original tags, the ones that had been returned with his effects. She'd worn them every day for 13 years, a reminder and a promise. Soon she'd have the second set, the special ones with the encryption key. Soon she'd have everything she needed to bring down the men who'd murdered her father. She closed her eyes, not sleeping but resting, conserving energy. In 3 days, she'd drive into the mountains, but before that, she needed to handle the immediate threat. Sullivan was reporting her movements, which meant Blackwood knew about Smoke, probably knew about the meeting at the Foxhole. The question was, would they let her go to Grayson or would they move first? Either way, Kira Donovan was ready. She'd been ready for 13 years. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and the promise of rain. Echo Company assembled for qualification courses, long hours of marksmanship, obstacle navigation, and combat scenarios designed to push recruits to their breaking points. Kira moved through each evolution with her carefully maintained mediocrity, finishing in the middle, drawing no attention. But she felt Blackwood's eyes on her throughout the day, watching, calculating, waiting. During afternoon formation, Colonel Vincent Aldridge appeared unexpectedly. His silver hair gleaming despite the overcast sky, his uniform pressed to razor sharpness. He stood on the reviewing platform with Sergeant Carver, surveying the assembled recruits with the cold assessment of a man who'd spent 30 years evaluating assets and liabilities. "Echo Company," Carver announced, her voice carrying across the parade ground. "Colonel Aldridge will be delivering a special lecture tomorrow on command ethics in combat environments. All recruits are required to attend. This is an honor and an opportunity to learn from one of our most experienced officers." Kira's pulse didn't change. Her expression remained neutral. but inside alarm bells screamed Aldridge was making his move. That evening after Chow Smoke's text arrived, "Grayson expects you Friday night. Window is 2200, 0400. After that, no guarantees." Aldridge requested extended duty roster review for Saturday. He's planning something. The timeline had compressed from 3 days to 4. Friday night, 36 hours away, 36 hours to maintain cover to not react to whatever psychological warfare Aldridge deployed in his lecture to give no indication that she understood what was happening. Tuesday morning brought the special lecture. Echo Company filed into a classroom that smelled of chalk dust and old sweat. Colonel Aldridge stood at the front, a PowerPoint presentation already loaded. The first slide showing a map of Iraq circa 1991. "Today we discuss difficult command decisions." Aldridge began, his voice smooth and authoritative. "Specifically decisions made during Operation Desert Storm and its aftermath. War is not clean, it is not simple, and sometimes the choices commanders must make defy easy moral categorization." He advanced the slide. A photograph appeared of destroyed Kurdish village buildings, reduced to rubble smoke rising in dark columns against a pale sky. March 1991. Aldridge continued, his eyes sweeping the room but lingering just slightly too long on Kira. "A Delta Force team conducting post-war operations encountered a situation that required immediate tactical decisions. Enemy forces had regrouped in a civilian area. The team commander, Colonel Dalton Donovan, had to decide whether to engage." Kira's hands remained relaxed in her lap, her face remained neutral, but her father's name in Aldridge's mouth felt like a desecration. Colonel Donovan made the difficult choice to authorize an airstrike. Civilian casualties were unavoidable but acceptable given the military necessity. Unfortunately, Donovan himself was killed in the subsequent firefight with enemy survivors. He received a posthumous Silver Star for his actions that day. The lie was delivered with perfect conviction. Aldridge's face showed appropriate gravitas. His voice the right mix of respect and regret. To anyone who didn't know the truth, it would sound heroic. But Kira noticed something. In the photograph on the screen, barely visible in one corner, was a timestamp 0043 HRS 17 MAR 91. And in the bottom right, partially obscured, were wooden crates with English lettering. The village had been destroyed at 4:30 in the morning, but the official report claimed the firefight occurred at 800 hours, a 3.5-hour discrepancy, and those crates were American. Aldridge had made a mistake, a small one but fatal. He tried to use a real photo to add credibility to his false narrative, not realizing or not caring that the evidence of his lie was visible in the image itself. The lesson here, Aldridge concluded, advancing to a final slide, is that command requires the courage to make difficult choices, to prioritize mission over sentiment, to understand that sometimes good men must die for great causes. Colonel Donovan understood that, eventually. His eyes locked on Kira's for just a moment. "The message was clear. I killed your father. I'm in control, and if you make the wrong move, you'll join him." Kira maintained her expression, kept her breathing steady, gave him nothing, but inside cold fury crystallized into absolute certainty. Friday night, the mountains, Grayson's cabin, and then justice. The walk back to barracks took 12 minutes. Kira's mind was already in the mountains, mapping approaches, planning contingencies. She had 36 hours to maintain her mask. Then her burner phone vibrated. Text from Smoke. "Change of plans. Aldridge requisitioned helicopter 0600 Saturday. Destination mountain coordinates. They're not waiting. Moving on Grayson at first light." Kira's blood turned to ice. Friday night wasn't soon enough. She'd have to move tonight, and this time she wouldn't be alone. If Blackwood's team reached Grayson first, the evidence and the last living witness would disappear forever. She had 9 hours to escape base undetected, drive 3 hours into hostile mountains, and extract a paranoid veteran before a kill team descended from above. Her father's voice whispered from memory. "When the timeline compresses, adaptation becomes survival." Kira deleted the text and began to plan. Friday night descended on Paris Island like a shroud, thick clouds obscuring the moon and turning the world into shades of gray and black. Perfect conditions for what Kira needed to do. At 2147 hours, she lay in her bunk fully clothed beneath the covers waiting. Around her, echo company settled into the rhythms of exhausted sleep, the snoring, the occasional muttered dream word, the creak of springs as someone shifted position. Corporal Sullivan's breathing had gone deep and regular 20 minutes ago, but Kira waited another 10 to be certain. At 21:57, she moved. The technique was something her father had drilled into her during night exercises in Montana: how to rise from a bunk without making the springs sing, how to move across a floor without creating pressure points that would cause boards to creak. How to become a ghost in your own space. She'd practiced it 10,000 times. Now it mattered. Kira reached her footlocker in absolute silence, retrieving the small pack she'd prepared. Inside civilian clothes, the encrypted drive cache, the burner phone, and a photograph of her father in his Delta Force dress uniform. She dressed in the shadows, each movement economical and precise, then slipped toward the barracks exit. The duty officer sat at his desk near the door, head down, doing paperwork. Kira had studied his patterns for 2 weeks. At 2200 hours exactly, he'd take his first bathroom break of the night. She had a 4-minute window. At 21:59:30, he stood stretching. At 2200 he disappeared down the corridor toward the latrine. Kira was through the door at 2200, melting into the darkness outside. The base at night was a different creature than during daylight hours. Security lights created pools of illumination separated by rivers of shadow. Guard rotations followed predictable patterns. Smoke's friends had ensured certain gaps appeared at specific times. Kira moved through those gaps like water, using the skills her father had taught her, the ones she'd kept hidden for 2 weeks. The perimeter fence at the northeast corner had a drainage culvert that passed beneath it, too small for most adults, but perfect for someone Kira's size. She'd identified it during her first week, filing the information away for exactly this moment. Now she crawled through, ignoring the cold water and the smell of rust and mold emerging on the civilian side at 22:03 hours. The blue Ford F-150 sat exactly where Smoke said it would be, 3 blocks from the fence line, parked beneath a broken streetlight. Kira approached cautiously, checking for surveillance, for watchers, for any sign of a trap. Nothing. She slipped inside, finding the keys in the visor, the Beretta M9 in the glove box, along with the map exactly as promised. The engine started with a reassuring rumble. Kira pulled out onto the empty street, heading north toward the mountains, toward answers, toward the man who'd witnessed her father's murder. The drive took 3 hours through darkness and back roads. Kira kept the radio off, staying alert for tales, for anything unusual. Her mind ran through scenarios and contingencies, planning for what she'd find at Grayson's cabin and what might go wrong. The mountains rose around her like sleeping giants as she left the coastal plains behind. The road narrowed, switchbacking up increasingly steep grades. At 01:37 hours, she reached the coordinates Smoke had marked, a turnoff onto what was barely more than a fire trail, rutted and overgrown. The truck lurched and groaned as she navigated it, branches scraping against the sides. At 02:18, the trail ended. Kira killed the engine and sat in darkness, listening. Night sounds filtered through the closed windows, insects, the wind through pines, the distant cry of an owl. Nothing human, nothing that suggested ambush. She checked the Beretta brass and copper, catching what little starlight penetrated the clouds. 15 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber, safety off, but trigger discipline maintained. Her father's voice echoed from 1,000 training sessions. The weapon is always loaded. Finger off the trigger until you're ready to destroy what you're aiming at. Know your target and what's beyond it. Kira stepped out into mountain air that was 15 degrees cooler than the coast, carrying the scent of pine and old earth. She moved into the forest with the confidence of someone who'd trained in wilderness navigation since childhood, following terrain features rather than trails, using her ears as much as her eyes. The cabin appeared after 40 minutes of careful approach. It sat in a small clearing built against a rock face that protected its rear. Fortified was an understatement. The windows had been covered with steel plates. The door reinforced with additional timber and subtle tripwires glinted at the clearing's edge. This was the home of a man who expected violence and had prepared accordingly. A blue lantern hung in the window unlit. Smoke had said Grayson would light it if seen to approach. The fact that it remained dark suggested either Grayson wasn't ready or something had gone wrong. Kira circled the cabin at a distance, noting the security measures. Cameras probably, motion sensors definitely, but also traditional defenses, stones arranged in patterns that would collapse noisily if disturbed, branches positioned to break underfoot and alert anyone inside. This was Korean War vintage security combined with modern paranoia. Effective against casual threats, but predictable to someone trained by Delta Force. She studied the approaches for 10 minutes before making her decision. The front door was obvious, too obvious, but there was a narrow gap between two of the stone arrangements on the eastern side, just wide enough for someone her size to slip through without triggering the alarm. Grayson had left himself a bolt hole, an escape route he could use if the cabin was breached, which meant it would be lightly defended because defending it would compromise its purpose. Kira moved through the gap with glacial slowness, testing each footfall before committing weight. It took 15 minutes to cross 20 feet. When she reached the cabin wall, she found what she'd expected. A narrow crawl space leading under the structure, probably connecting to an underground escape tunnel. The voice came from behind her, cold and hard. "Most people try the front door. You're either very smart or very stupid." Kira froze, not turning. The double click of a shotgun being cocked punctuated the night. "Thomas Grayson," she said quietly, keeping her hands visible and away from the Beretta at her waist. "My name is Kira Donovan. Jackson Brennan said you were expecting me." Silence. Then, "Turn around, slowly, hands where I can see them." Kira complied with careful precision. The man standing 15 feet away matched Smoke's description but looked older than 55, aged by more than years. Gray beard shot through with white face carved into hard lines by stress and guilt, eyes that held the haunted look of someone who'd seen too much and survived too long. The Remington 870 in his hands never wavered. "Kira Donovan," Grayson repeated, his voice rough from disuse. "Dalton's kid. You've got his eyes, winter steel, and his jawline. And that way of standing like you're calculating 8 different ways to take me down." "Only 6, Kira said. "I don't know the terrain well enough for 8. Something that might have been a laugh escaped Grayson's throat. "Christ, you even sound like him. That tactical honesty, that precision." The shotgun lowered slightly but didn't disappear. "Smoke called. Said you were coming. Said you knew the truth about Desert Vale. Said you wanted the evidence. I need it, to finish what my father started. Your father's mission got him killed. What makes you think yours will turn out different? Because I'm not fighting alone and I'm not trusting the system that murdered him." Grayson studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward the cabin. "Inside. We talk there. And Donovan, if this is some kind of trap, if Aldridge sent you, know that I've got this place rigged to blow. I die, you die, and this whole mountainside goes up. Evidence included. No trap, just a daughter looking for justice. Justice." Grayson's bitter laugh echoed through the pines. "That word means something different after you watch a good man get murdered for doing the right thing. But come on, we'll see what justice looks like to you." The cabin's interior was sparse but meticulous. One main room containing a cot, a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, and walls covered in maps, photographs, and newspaper clippings. It reminded Kira of the murder board she'd seen in crime procedurals, except this one tracked a 13-year-old conspiracy rather than a recent killing. Grayson set the shotgun within reach but not in hand. A gesture of cautious trust, he gestured to one of the chairs. "Sit, and tell me why Dalton's daughter thinks she can do what he couldn't." Kira sat her back to the wall habit and began. She told him about the training, about finding the encrypted drive, about enlisting at Paris Island and discovering both Blackwood and Aldridge stationed there. She told him about Smoke's confession and Aldridge's lecture about the photograph with the timestamp that proved the official story was a lie. Grayson listened without interruption, his haunted eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You want to know what really happened?" he said finally. Not a question. The whole truth. Not the sanitized version Smoke could tell you secondhand. You want it from someone who was there, who saw it with his own eyes. Yes. Grayson rose and moved to a locked trunk in the corner. From it he removed a weatherproof case and a leather-bound journal. He set both on the table between them with the reverence of someone handling sacred objects. March 17, 1991. He began, his voice taking on the flat quality of someone reciting from nightmares. We'd been in country for 5 days. Found the chemical depot destroyed like I told Smoke, but Aldridge wasn't concerned. He had other plans. There was this Kurdish village, 3 clicks north, Kara Hassan it was called. Maybe 200 people, shepherds mostly. But after our ground campaign pushed Saddam's army back, some Iraqi soldiers sought refuge there. Deserters. Boys who were conscripted and didn't want to die for a dictator. He opened the journal, its pages yellowed and dog-eared from constant reviewing. The Kurds were harboring them, trying to negotiate safe passage to Turkey. It was a peace initiative, unofficial but real. And there were rumors that Kurdish leaders were meeting with Iraqi military officers trying to establish some kind of ceasefire arrangement in the region. Kira leaned forward, which would have ended the conflict sooner. Exactly. But Greystone Solutions, the defense contractor that had Aldridge on payroll, they didn't want peace. Peace meant reduced military presence, fewer weapon sales contracts drying up. So they paid Aldridge $2 million to make sure the conflict stayed hot, and he saw an opportunity. We had recovered some chemical munitions from another site, old mustard gas shells. Aldridge's plan was simple: use them to hit the village, kill the negotiators, make it look like Saddam's chemical weapons were still active and being used. Justify continued presence. Keep the war machine running. Grayson's hands trembled slightly as he turned pages in the journal. March 16th, Aldridge gave the order, told us we were eliminating enemy combatants who posed a threat to regional stability. Your father knew it was bullshit immediately. He'd been gathering intelligence on his own, had contacts with Kurdish leaders. He knew those weren't combatants, they were families, and the Iraqi deserters were kids who wanted to go home. What did he do? Dalton refused the order, flat out said no. Said using chemical weapons on civilians violated every law of war, every principle we were supposed to be defending. Aldridge tried the chain of command argument, the tactical necessity argument, the greater good argument. Your father didn't budge, so Aldridge threatened him court-martial, treason charges, prison. Dalton's response was to pull out a satellite phone and say he was calling JAG right then and there. Grayson's voice went even flatter. That's when Aldridge turned to Blackwood. Lieutenant Wade Blackwood, 25 years old, ambitious, suffering from PTSD after watching chemical weapons effects during the ground campaign. Aldridge offered him a choice: follow orders and earn a promotion or face charges alongside Donovan. Told him good soldiers follow orders even when they don't understand them. Told him sometimes sacrifices are necessary for the mission. And Blackwood chose. Blackwood chose survival. Maybe he believed Aldridge. Maybe he was too broken to think clearly. Maybe he was just weak. Doesn't matter. Results the same. Grayson closed the journal, his eyes distant. They staged it that evening. Fake patrol around the village perimeter. Your father took point with me as his medic 20 meters back. Blackwood was rear security. When we reached a spot with good cover, Aldridge radioed the signal, and Blackwood shot your father in the back. 3 rounds center mass. M4A1 carbine, 5.56mm NATO rounds. The clinical precision of the description somehow made it worse. Kira's hands had clenched into fists on the table. She forced them open. I was treating a wounded shepherd who'd been caught in crossfire from an unrelated skirmish. Grayson continued. I saw it through binoculars, saw Blackwood take aim, saw your father go down. He tried to turn, tried to draw his sidearm, but the first round had clipped his spine. He went down face first in the sand. His voice broke slightly. I heard his last words over the radio. He keyed his mic and said, "Tell my daughter truth matters more than orders." Then Blackwood put 2 more rounds in him to be sure. Silence filled the cabin. Outside, the wind picked up, making the pines whisper ancient secrets. I wanted to run to him, Grayson said. Wanted to try to save him. But I knew if I revealed I'd seen it, I'd be next. So I stayed hidden, stayed quiet, and I've lived with that cowardice for 13 years. You're not a coward, Kira said quietly. You survived to tell the truth. That's what my father wanted. Maybe, or maybe I just didn't have his courage. Grayson pushed the waterproof case toward her. Everything's in here. Photos of the village before and after. Soil samples from the site. I took them myself, preserved them properly. Financial records showing the wire transfer from Greystone Solutions to Aldridge's offshore account. Your father's journal with his daily observations. And these... He pulled out a set of dog tags on a chain. They looked identical to standard issue except for the unusual markings etched into the metal. The encryption key. Your father gave them to me 3 days before he died. Said if anything happened, get them to Smoke, who'd get them to you when the time was right. The notches correspond to a cipher. Combined with the flash drive, they'll unlock everything, documentation, recordings, evidence that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Kira took the dog tags with reverent care, feeling their weight. 13 years her father had been dead. 13 years she'd prepared, and now, finally, she had what she needed. There's one more thing, Grayson said. He moved to a different part of the trunk and pulled out a small digital recorder. I kept an audio diary, every day for 3 months after we got back. I recorded what I remembered while it was fresh. Details about Aldridge's orders, Blackwood's actions, the cover-up. It's not admissible in court probably, but it's contemporaneous documentation. He set the recorder on the table. When you go after them, and I know you will use everything, don't give them time to mount a defense or call in favors. Hit them with everything at once, so massive and so public that even their connections can't save them. That's the plan. Good. Your father would be proud. Grayson's eyes held hers. One question before you go. Are you prepared to kill them if it comes to that? Because they'll kill you without hesitation. Kira thought about that, about the thousands of hours of combat training, about her father's lessons on when violence was justified, about the line between justice and revenge. I'm prepared to do what's necessary to ensure the truth survives. If that means killing them, so be it. But I'd rather see them in prison, see them disgraced, see their names become synonymous with betrayal. Death would be too easy. Grayson nodded. Dalton's daughter, indeed. He always said the best revenge is letting your enemies live long enough to see everything they built destroyed. The burner phone in Kira's pocket vibrated. She checked it, a text from Smoke. They know. Blackwood left base with 4 contractors 90 minutes ago, heading your direction. Get out now. Kira's blood turned to ice. They tracked me. Of course they did. Aldridge didn't get to be a colonel by being stupid. Grayson was already moving gathering equipment with practiced efficiency. How far behind are they? 90 minutes when Smoke sent this, maybe an hour now. Then we don't have much time. You need to go. Back tunnel leads 200 meters, downslope comes out near a fire road. Take everything. Get back to base before they realize you're gone. I'll hold them here. I'm not leaving you to die. I've been dead for 13 years, Donovan, just waiting for a reason to stop breathing. Grayson's smile was terrible. Besides, I've got surprises for them. This cabin is rigged with enough C4 to level the clearing. I blow it when they breach, take them all with me. That's suicide. That's atonement. He pressed the weatherproof case and journal into her hands. Your father died finishing his mission. I failed mine by surviving. Let me make it right. Before Kira could argue, headlights swept through the trees below the cabin. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Go! Grayson shoved her toward the back wall, pulling aside a rug to reveal a trap door. Tunnel's clear. Crawl fast, don't look back, and Kira, finish it. Make their deaths mean something. Kira hesitated one more second, meeting the eyes of the broken man who'd carried her father's truth for 13 years. Then she dropped through the trapdoor into darkness, pulling it closed above her. The tunnel was narrow, tight, claustrophobic. Kira crawled with desperate speed, the waterproof case strapped to her back. The journal clutched in one hand, the Beretta in the other. Behind her, muffled by earth and timber, she heard shouting. Blackwood's voice, harsh and commanding. "Grayson, we know you're in there. Come out, and this ends clean." Grayson's response was faint but clear. "Nothing about this has ever been clean, Lieutenant. You made sure of that when you shot Dalton Donovan in the back." Kira crawled faster. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, a birth canal of earth and darkness. Her lungs burned. Her knees screamed protest, but she kept moving. Then the world exploded. The blast wave traveled through the tunnel like a fist of angry gods, slamming into Kira with enough force to drive the air from her lungs. Earth rained down, timber groaned. For a terrifying moment, she thought the tunnel would collapse, burying her alive. But it held. Kira emerged from the exit point 2 minutes later, gasping, covered in dirt, ears ringing from the explosion. Behind and above her, the clearing where Grayson's cabin had stood was now a fireball reaching for the sky. Trees burned. Secondary explosions popped as ammunition cooked off in the heat. She allowed herself 5 seconds of grief for Thomas Grayson, the man who'd finally found his courage. Then she ran. The fire road was exactly where he'd said, and 50 meters down it sat, her truck miraculously undamaged. Kira threw the case and journal into the cab, started the engine, and drove with controlled urgency down the mountain. Not so fast as to attract attention, not so slow as to waste time. The drive back to Paris Island took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Kira's mind raced faster than the truck, planning the next moves. She had the evidence now. Everything needed to destroy Aldridge and Blackwood. But she also had their full attention. They'd know she'd been at Grayson's cabin. They'd know she had the evidence, which meant they'd move against her immediately. She couldn't go back to the barracks, couldn't pretend nothing had happened. The time for subtlety was over. At 05:47 hours, Kira pulled into a 24-hour diner 15 miles from base and called the number Smoke had given her for emergencies. He answered on the first ring. "You alive?" "Yes, Grayson isn't. He blew the cabin with himself and Blackwood's contractors inside. I have everything, the evidence, the journals, the dog tags." A long pause. "Jesus. Okay. Where are you?" "Highway 21, the Sunrise Diner. I can't go back to base. They'll be waiting." "You're right, but we've got backup. My niece, Lieutenant Harper Westfield, JAG Corps, she's been building a case against Aldridge for 5 years. Doesn't have enough to prosecute, but with what you've got, she will. Meet me at the old boathouse on base Eastern Perimeter, 0600. I'll bring Harper. We legitimize the evidence, get it into official channels, and then you're protected. And if it's a trap, then we both die, but the evidence survives. I've already made copies, got them stashed in 3 different locations with instructions to release if I don't check in. Aldridge can kill us, but he can't stop the truth anymore." Kira checked her watch. 0549. 11 minutes to decide. Trust Smoke and possibly walk into an ambush, or run with the evidence and spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Her father's voice echoed from memory. "Trust is a weapon. Use it carefully." "I'll be there," Kira said. The eastern perimeter of Paris Island held old infrastructure from earlier decades, abandoned training facilities, obsolete storage buildings, and the boathouse, a weathered wooden structure that had once supported maritime operations. It sat isolated near the marshland edge, perfect for a clandestine meeting or an ambush. Kira approached with tactical caution at 0558, parking the truck 200 meters away and approaching on foot through tall grass. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, transforming the landscape into something almost beautiful. Smoke's silhouette was unmistakable against the boathouse. Compact, solid, a rock against which 13 years of conspiracy had broken. Next to him stood a woman in JAG uniform, sharp-featured and intense. Lieutenant Harper Westfield, probably. The family resemblance was subtle but present in the jawline and the way they both stood with parade ground posture, even in casual conversation. Kira was 20 meters from the boathouse when her instincts screamed warning. Something was wrong. Smoke's body language was too rigid. Westfield kept glancing to the side toward the boathouse interior, not meeting Smoke's eyes. The trap became obvious when Blackwood stepped out of the shadows behind them. "Donovan," his voice carried across the morning air. "Don't run, we just want to talk." Kira's hand moved to the Beretta at her waist, but three more figures emerged from concealment contractors, former military by their bearing, all armed, flanking positions, overlapping fields of fire, professional setup. Then Colonel Aldridge walked out of the boathouse, his silver hair catching the early light, his expression one of calm control. "Sergeant Brennan," Aldridge said conversationally. "Thank you for bringing her here. Your cooperation will be noted in your record." Kira's world tilted. Smoke had betrayed her after everything. But then she saw Smoke's face properly. The fury barely contained the tension in his shoulders. And she understood. They had leverage, something that forced his compliance. "My niece's husband," Smoke said, his voice tight with rage. "Captain Marcus Westfield, they've got him. Say he's at a black site. Cooperate or he disappears." Lieutenant Westfield's face was a mask of controlled anguish. "I'm sorry, Kira, but I can't. I won't let my husband die for this." "Very touching," Aldridge said. "Family loyalty, admirable in its way, but ultimately pointless. Donovan, you've put us in a difficult position. You have evidence that could prove embarrassing. We have resources and authority. The solution is obvious." Kira's mind raced through scenarios. 4 armed contractors plus Blackwood plus Aldridge versus her with a single pistol. Smoke was unarmed. Westfield conflicted. The odds were catastrophically bad. But her father had trained her for bad odds. "The evidence is already out there," Kira said, her voice steady. "Multiple copies. Instructions to release if I don't check in. You can kill me, but the truth survives." Aldridge's expression didn't change. "Interesting strategy, but flawed. You have evidence. We have institutional authority and 30 years of established relationships. Your father made a similar calculation. He thought documentation and proper channels would protect him. They didn't. He died in the desert and his evidence was buried with him. The system protects itself, Ms. Donovan, not idealists who mistake procedure for power." He gestured to the contractors. "Secure all 3. Transport them to the offshore facility. No records, no traces. In 36 hours they'll be classified as deserters who fled the country. Case closed." The contractors moved in with professional coordination. Kira's hand edged toward her pistol, but the angles were impossible. She'd get 1, maybe 2 before the others cut her down. Then Smoke's voice cut through the tension. "Vincent, before you do this, you should know something. That explosion at Grayson's cabin, I was monitoring it on satellite. All 4 of your contractors died, but you sent 5 men with Blackwood. Where's the 5th? Aldridge's expression flickered confusion, then calculation. "What are you—" The shot came from the tree line, a single supersonic crack. The contractor closest to Westfield dropped red mist where his head had been a moment before. Chaos erupted. Kira moved instantly, all pretense of cooperation abandoned. Her hand came up with the Beretta as she dropped and rolled left, changing position before the contractors could track her. 2 shots double-tapped the nearest contractor, catching both rounds in the chest plate. The impacts didn't penetrate but knocked him backward, disrupted his aim. Smoke, old but not slow, grabbed the dropped contractor's rifle and opened fire on full automatic suppressive rather than accurate, keeping Aldridge and Blackwood pinned. More shots from the tree line, a precision marksman taking targets of opportunity. Another contractor went down, then a third. Professional work. Kira came up out of her role in a shooting stance, acquired Blackwood in her sights. This was the moment. The man who'd killed her father 15 meters away, reaching for his sidearm. Their eyes met across the distance. Recognition. Understanding. Both knew what came next. Kira's finger tightened on the trigger. Then Blackwood did something unexpected. He didn't draw his weapon. Instead, he raised his hands, palms out, a gesture of surrender. "Don't," he said, his voice carrying despite the gunfire. "I know what I did, I know what I am, but killing me doesn't change anything." "It changes everything," Kira replied, her aim never wavering. "Does it? Your father's still dead. The village is still destroyed. The war still happened. All killing me does is make you a murderer too." "Justice isn't murder." "No," Blackwood agreed. "But this is revenge, and revenge is a chain that never ends. I killed your father. You kill me. My brother kills you. Your family kills him. Where does it stop?" The question hung in the dawn air. Kira's finger remained on the trigger, applying the 4 pounds of pressure needed, just needing 1 more pound to send the round downrange. Movement to her right, Aldridge drawing a pistol, aiming not at Kira but at Westfield. "Everyone stops or the lieutenant dies," Aldridge announced. The gunfire ceased. Smoke lowered his rifle. The tree line went silent. For a moment the world held its breath. Then Westfield moved. She was JAG, not infantry, but she'd gone through the same basic training as every officer. She knew how to disarm an opponent. Her hand shot out, deflecting Aldridge's aim upward. As her body pivoted into his space, the pistol fired round, going skyward, and then Westfield had control of his wrist, applying a joint lock that forced the weapon from his grip. Before Aldridge could recover, Westfield drew her own service weapon, a Sig Sauer M11, and pressed it against his shoulder. "For the record," she said, her voice cold as winter, "threatening a JAG officer is unwise. Threatening one whose husband you've kidnapped is suicidal." She fired. The round punched through Aldridge's shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees. Not lethal, but absolutely incapacitating. The fight went out of the remaining contractors. They dropped weapons, raised hands, recognizing defeat when it stared them down. From the tree line emerged a figure Kira hadn't expected, a man in his 40s, military bearing, carrying a sniper rifle with the casual competence of a professional. "Captain Marcus Westfield," he announced, moving toward his wife. "Turns out reports of my capture were greatly exaggerated. Took me 3 days to escape their black site and track you here. Sorry I'm late." Harper stared at her husband, confusion mixing with relief. "But how did you—" "I wasn't at a black site," Marcus said, his eyes hard. "I was reconnaissance for Blackwood's team. When I realized they were moving to eliminate a witness and destroy evidence, not recover stolen intel like Aldridge claimed, I broke off. Tracked them here instead, figured where there was evidence there'd be you." He looked at Kira. "Your father's documentation mentioned a medic. Thomas Grayson. I'm sorry I couldn't get there in time." Harper Westfield's composure finally cracked. She holstered her weapon and grabbed her husband, holding him like she'd never let go. Smoke moved to Aldridge, looking down at the wounded colonel with undisguised contempt. "You made one mistake, Vincent. You assumed everyone you bought would stay bought. But some people can't be bought, and some people remember their oaths." Within minutes, the boathouse clearing filled with military police and Inspector General investigators. Smoke had called them before the meeting, giving them coordinates and instructions to arrive at 0615 regardless of what happened. The cleanup was surgical evidence, documented witnesses, separated the wounded, treated. Brigadier General Patricia Monroe, Inspector General, arrived personally to oversee. She took one look at the scene, the evidence case Kira had dropped during the fight, Aldridge bleeding and cursing, Blackwood sitting with his hands behind his head. And her expression went professionally neutral. "Someone want to tell me what the hell happened here?" Smoke stepped forward. "General, I'm Jackson Brennan, Sergeant retired. This is Kira Donovan, daughter of Colonel Dalton Donovan. What happened here is the end of a 13-year cover-up of war crimes, conspiracy, and murder. And we have everything documented." The interrogations took 16 hours. Kira sat in a sterile room and told her story from beginning to end, leaving nothing out. The evidence spoke for itself: photos, journals, financial records, audio recordings, soil samples. The encrypted drive unlocked with the dog tag's cipher contained her father's complete documentation of Aldridge's crimes. Blackwood, interestingly, didn't fight it. He confessed to everything: the murder, the cover-up, his role in the conspiracy. When asked why, he simply said, "Because I'm tired of lying, and because that young woman's father deserved better than what I gave him." Aldridge, by contrast, lawyered up immediately and said nothing. But the evidence was overwhelming. By the end of the week, both men were in custody pending courts-martial. The investigation expanded rapidly. Greystone Solutions executives were arrested. Financial records revealed a web of corruption reaching into the Pentagon and Congress. Kurdish village survivors were located and given platform to testify. The truth, buried for 13 years, finally broke into daylight. 6 months later, Kira Donovan stood at attention in dress blues at a ceremony she'd never expected to attend. The parade ground at Paris Island was packed with Marines, dignitaries, press, and family members. Colonel Dalton "Reaper" Donovan was being awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously for his refusal to participate in war crimes and his documentation of corruption. His name was being cleared, his reputation restored. But more than that, the Kurdish village of Kara Hassan was receiving reparations, $75 million for medical care, rebuilding, and compensation for the families destroyed. A permanent memorial would be erected. The truth would be taught. And standing beside Kira was Jackson "Smoke" Brennan, wearing his own uniform for the first time in decades. Tears streaming down his weathered face as they presented Eleanor Donovan with the Medal of Honor her husband had earned. After the ceremony, Kira stood alone at the memorial wall where her father's name had been added, freshly carved into granite: Colonel Dalton Donovan, Delta Force. 1945-1991. Truth matters more than orders. "You did it, Dad," she whispered. 13 years, but you did it." She heard footsteps behind her, not the heavy tread of boots, but lighter, familiar. Eleanor Donovan appeared at her daughter's side, older now, silver threading through her dark hair, but standing straighter than she had in 13 years. "He would have been so proud," Eleanor said softly, her hand finding Kira's. "Not just of what you did, but how you did it. You gave him justice without becoming what they were." Kira's throat tightened. "I had good teachers. Both of you." Eleanor smiled, tears glistening. "You're so much like him. That same stubborn honor, that same refusal to let evil hide in shadows." She squeezed her daughter's hand. "But you're also you, Kira. And that's what won. Not his training, not his plans, your heart, your choice to seek justice instead of revenge." "I miss him, Mom." "I know, baby. I do too, every day." Eleanor looked up at the memorial wall. "But now we can miss him knowing the truth stands beside his name. That's worth something." They stood together in silence, mother and daughter, bound by loss and love, and the completion of a 13-year mission. Finally, Eleanor turned to leave. "Come to dinner next month. I'll make his favorite pot roast with those burnt edges he always loved." "I'll be there," Kira promised. As her mother walked away, a hand touched her other shoulder. A hand touched her shoulder. She turned to find Smoke standing there, his pale blue eyes reflecting the memorial's polished stone. "He'd be proud," Smoke said, "not just of bringing them down, but of who you are. The restraint you showed. Could have killed Blackwood, but you chose justice instead. Blackwood's punishment is living with what he did. Death would have been mercy. Your father thought the same way. The best revenge is making your enemies live to see their own defeat." Smoke handed her a folder. "This came for you. Pentagon assignment." Kira opened it, reading quickly. "They want me to redesign hand-to-hand combat curriculum, incorporate advanced techniques for smaller operators. You're famous now. That boathouse fight security cameras caught all 28 seconds. Every drill instructor in the Corps has watched it. 4 contractors, and you took them all down before backup arrived. They're calling it the most perfect example of asymmetric combat ever recorded." Kira thought back to those 28 seconds, the explosion of controlled violence after 2 weeks of hiding her capabilities. Every technique her father had taught her, every drill, every lesson, all compressed into half a minute of perfect application. It wasn't perfect, I got lucky. Luck is what the unskilled call preparation meeting opportunity. You prepared for 17 years. Luck had nothing to do with it. They stood together in silence, two warriors separated by age but united by purpose and grief and the memory of a man who'd chosen honor over orders. "What happens now?" Kira asked. "Now you teach. Pass on what your father taught you. Make sure the next generation understands that strength isn't about size or gender, it's about heart and skill in doing what's right when powerful people say you're wrong." That sounds like something he'd say. It is. Said it to me in Korea 1952 when I wanted to quit after watching our platoon sergeant beat a prisoner. Your daddy stopped him, reported him, took the beating that came from standing up. He told me then, the system is only as good as the people willing to fight for it from inside. Kira looked out across the parade ground where new recruits were training, struggling through obstacle courses and combat drills, learning to be Marines. Among them were women who would never know the battles that had been fought to give them their chance. That was okay. Better even. The best victories were the ones that became invisible because they changed the system permanently. "I'll teach them," Kira said. "Everything he taught me, so no one else has to spend 13 years preparing for one moment of justice. That's all any of us can do. Pass the torch. Keep the fire burning." Smoke pulled something from his pocket, a set of dog tags. Her father's special ones, the encryption key. "These are yours now. Keep them. Remember what they represent." Kira took them with reverent care, adding them to the chain around her neck next to her father's original tags. 2 sets now. One for the soldier he'd been. One for the mission he'd left behind. That evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Kira stood alone in the training barn where she'd teach the next generation. The space smelled of fresh sawdust and possibility. On the wall hung a photograph, her father in his Delta Force uniform, 1989, his gray eyes holding that same intensity she saw in her own mirror. Beneath it, she'd mounted a plaque with his final words, "Truth matters more than orders." Kira touched the dog tags at her throat, feeling their familiar weight. Then she moved to the center of the room and began the forms her father had taught her 17 years ago in a Montana barn while snow piled against the walls. The movements flowed like water, like memory, like justice finally achieved. Each strike was precision, each stance was purpose, each breath was preparation for whatever came next. Because the war wasn't over. It would never be over. There would always be powerful men making difficult choices and choosing wrong. There would always be soldiers asked to follow orders that violated conscience. There would always be a need for warriors willing to stand up and say no. And now, thanks to Colonel Dalton Reaper Donovan and his daughter Kira, there was a new generation learning that strength came not from size or rank or authority, but from the courage to do what's right when everyone says you're wrong. In the distance, Echo Company ran their evening formation voices, carrying on the wind as they called cadence. Among them were women who would never know the names of those who'd fought for their place. That anonymity was its own kind of victory. Kira completed her forms and stood at attention facing her father's photograph. She raised her hand in salute, precise, respectful, final. "Mission complete, Dad. Rest easy." The photograph stared back with those gray eyes that saw everything and missed nothing. And if Kira imagined she saw approval there, pride there, love there, well, some truths didn't need evidence to be believed. She turned and walked out into the evening, ready for whatever came next. A warrior, a teacher, a daughter who'd kept her promise, the legacy of the Reaper carried forward.